Well, good morning and welcome to the Emory Conference Center. My name is David Stevens. I'm the principal investigator of the Atlanta Clinical and Translational Science Institute, ACTSI. I also serve as vice president for research of Emory's Woodruff Health Sciences Center. And I, along with Georgia Bio, welcome you to, this is the seventh academic and industry intersection conference that we've held. These have been exciting conferences. Today we're going to focus upon the question of Georgia as a biotechnology capital, and the ACTSI, as well as its partner institutions, Morehouse School of Medicine, Georgia Tech, and Emory University, welcome you. We're one of 62 clinical and translational science institutes in the U.S. funded by NIH. Our goal is really to accelerate clinical and translational research and to look at the interface between academia and industry. We also want to thank our healthcare partners, in particular Emory Healthcare, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Grady, and the VA. We have a number of programs. I encourage you to look at the ACTSI website, actsi.org, for our programs that deal with education and training, as well as promoting clinical and translational research. We have 35 network sites within the metropolitan Atlanta area. We're looking for an increased partnership with the University of Georgia, all exciting activities to promote clinical and translational research in Georgia. I want to acknowledge our event sponsors, the Atlanta Center for Medical Research and T3 Labs. I want to particularly thank Elizabeth Thompson and Maria Thacker, who have helped really to organize this, as well as the organizing committee, and Andrew West and his engagement with the organizing committee. And without their involvement, this event would not be possible. And I'm going to introduce Russ Medford. Russ is a managing partner at Salutramed and the Salutramed Group, and here to introduce our special guest speaker. So Russ, welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Bob Neerum had called me a few months ago to discuss this conference and to suggest who might be an appropriate and compelling nationally recognized keynote speaker, and I was immediately intrigued by the request, but also by the title that he told me that you had set for this meeting, which was called Georgia as a Biotechnology Capital ? It was the question mark that got my attention. It speaks volumes to me, and perhaps all of us in this room who've been involved with biotechnology and life science here in Georgia, and the sometimes uncertain journey we've taken over the last 20 years together. It also clarified for me immediately to whom I would recommend to Bob and the organizing committee to keynote the conference. Ken Moch is just that national figure that I thought would be perfect for this conference. He has walked the walk at almost every stage of the biotechnology journey, from the earliest stages of founding and leading innovative and landmark companies in both the public and private space. They include Liposome Company, Alteon, Biosite, and Chimerix. He's also been on the financing side with Catalyst Ventures. He has been on the forefront of leading companies that are developing and have developed new and important therapeutics for multiple serious diseases. From a policy standpoint, he has been doing the work and national leadership in founding and building multiple state biotechnology organizations and chairing some of them. North Carolina Bio, New Jersey Bio, New York Bio. And that gives him a perspective and insight that I think would be wise to consider carefully as we discuss Georgia's life science industry today. What he has to say, I think, has import not just for policy, but also for each individual entrepreneur and stakeholder as they move forward in this journey in biotechnology. So I don't want to embarrass him any further, but I do have a couple of embarrassing things to say. He is one of those rare leaders in the industry who not only is deeply respected on a national and international level for the breadth and depth of his accomplishments and skills as an entrepreneur, founder, and CEO, but he's genuinely admired for his commitment and work to make this industry live up to its highest aspirations of ethics and care and humanity, and to ensure that the innovation of science and technology, what this conference should be all about, realizes its full potential to fight and cure diseases for everyone. I've known Ken since we first met and began working together on the National Bio Board of Directors in 1999. I have the privilege of calling him my friend and now a business partner and managing partner with me in the Salutramed group here. Without further ado, I give you Ken Moch.
Let's see if this works. I get a green light. There we are. And if I could only see if I push wrong button, right button. Ah, there we are. Delighted to be here this morning. Thank you, Russ, for those words. I almost do want to stop right now and just let that settle in. Let me just get a little perspective. How many of you consider yourselves to be entrepreneurs? Hands up a little higher. Okay. How many are policy people? A few. What are the rest of you? Scientists without, I'm just trying to understand. The reason for that is, look, let's go to the beginning of all this. Biotechnology is a crapshoot. Developing new drugs is an incredibly difficult undertaking that combines science, money, huge risk, and extraordinary regulation, right? So it's just an incredibly difficult pathway. And more importantly, getting it from the idea to the bench, from the bench to somebody's bedside, is as complex as we all write about, hear about, think about, and live. I've had the pleasure of having some drugs get to market. I've had the displeasure of watching, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment go poof when a statistician turns the page on a statistical report on a phase 3 trial and says, oops, your p-value is 0.16. Sorry. It's just one of those things, but it's an extraordinarily complex thing. And one of the most important aspects of it, the thing that I like to reinforce to everybody, is this is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. It requires people with extraordinary skills and experience from many different backgrounds to develop a new drug. And I think that's part of the theme of what I've seen over the course of too many decades in this business is you need to have the full spectrum of skills and experience and people to make a biotechnology, to bring a drug to market. There are lots of ideas out there. From the financing side, one of the things they often say is it's not the idea that I really look for, it's the people who are going to help make that idea reality. How are you going to get it from a concept, from the bench to the bedside? So I was asked to talk about making it the question mark in that sentence, and I have some thoughts and perspectives I'd like to share with you. A little bit depressing, a lot optimistic, I hope, but kind of crossing the spectrum of how could Atlanta become a biotech cluster? Should it become one is something you'll have to ask yourselves, but how could it? And it starts with this, let's start with the basic premise. You're not alone. Every state that has a biotechnology industry or some companies is thinking, how do we become a cluster? How do we get that to happen for us? And so that competition is just like competition in any industry. It requires all the skills, all the efforts of the scientific community, of the policymakers. It's going to require money. It's going to require a lot of things to make that happen. And I hate in Atlanta to bring in Yogi Berra from the Evil Empire, but I've always thought this is one of the best quotes ever, which is if you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. And I think that that's part of the strategy issue you have to think about. And it's also Alice in Wonderland, right? You're sure to get somewhere if only you walk long enough. That's the Cheshire Cat to Alice, and that's the kind of the question for all of you. Where do you want to get? What's it going to look like, and how do you plan? Right? That's the issue at hand. If that question mark goes away, how do you make that question mark go away? So let's get to reality. From a national perspective, Georgia and Atlanta are interesting locations, or an interesting location, but not on the radar screen. So when you look at the data, and this is data from this year, Atlanta's not in the top 15 cities for biotech funding. I actually don't know where it is because the list I found didn't go down that far. but it's just not there at this time. There are things here, as you'll see, but not really a lot. So I went back to, this is PricewaterhouseCoopers and the National Venture Capital Association data reports on, this is on a quarterly basis for 20 years of the venture capital funding reported to that group. And as you can see here, quarterly, I can't really see it because I don't have my glasses on, but you'll get the number of deals on the left-hand side and the amount of money on a quarterly basis on the right-hand side. So it gives you a feeling in Massachusetts, no surprise. A lot's going on there. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, same idea, somewhere in the order of 5 to 15 deals a quarter. More recently, $50 to $100 million plus or minus per quarter in early stage, seed and early stage biotech deals in that particular cluster area of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Texas, 1 to 4 deals, 1 to 2 deals a quarter, $20 to $40 million per quarter of deals, and then Georgia. Let's just say 1 deal, maybe 2, if you're lucky, a quarter. Not particularly impressive numbers. Something going on. It's not like there's nothing going on, please. It's just, it's a very low rate comparatively, right? When you look at expansion, later stage deals, at least as reported to the National Venture Capital Association and PricewaterhouseCoopers, again, not particularly exciting numbers. There's activity, but this is why Atlanta's not in the top, and Georgia's not in the top 15. And then when you look at it all together, that's been reported, again, this is the summary of all the prior data for Georgia, so you get a feeling for what it is. So the facts are what they are. We're at a certain place. That is just a fact, right? There's nothing you can do about that fact. And it's troubling as much for the lack of progress as its size, right? It's not only that it's a low number, it's that the number isn't, there's not a trajectory. You can't get a line that's particularly pointing upwards to look, there's more activity. Each quarter we're seeing more, each year we're seeing more. It's kind of a steady state, which is not where you want to be if you're a growing cluster. Right? I think that's the key takeaway I got from those slides, that there's stuff going on, but it's not increasing. All right, so that leads to the question, can this trajectory be changed? For those of you who can't see it, it's, are you hungry or are you lunch is what this slide says. So can the trajectory be changed? Well, let's ask the question differently. Are the resources here to build a community, an entrepreneurial community, and to build a nationally competitive cluster? Right? Do the pieces exist that you can put together to make that happen? And if so, how? I think that's the real question of that question mark, right? So let's start off with the basic economics. There is a lot of money flowing into Atlanta, not only, and the region in Georgia. This is money from Research America. This is data from Research America. But looking at the institutions that are funding activities in Georgia, note that, the state rank is about in the 15 zone if you want to add all that stuff. It's not so bad in investment sources. So there's money flowing. The money flows in terms of NIH funding, about $500 million flowed, particularly into Emory and University of Georgia, but Emory being the dominant institution. But this is money that's going to be doing a lot of different things. It's not only basic science, it's obviously the whole spectrum of NIH funding, but it's indicative of significant activity, and that's significant. This is hard to read, I realize. It's less than other states that I've shown you in the prior entrepreneurial activity, but it's still competitive stuff. So, it's not like, woe is me, we're done, why is Ken wasting our time? There is potential there, and it's a matter of how it's focused, managed, and nurtured, right? I think that's the issue on the table for everybody. And these slides are going to be posted, I understand, if anybody, because there's a lot of data going fast, and then there are a lot of pictures and whatever. But you get the idea that there's money, it's flowing in, there's a lot going on, it's pretty focused. There are some dominant institutions in other states that, there is no other Boston. There is no other Boston with that many institutions. So put that aside and then figure out how do you become in the top 10 or top 15, not the top 1. All right. So while it's smaller, the economic benefits are meaningful. And I, again, have to put my glasses on. But the thing I liked about this particular slide, In 2012, which is the latest data I could find, Georgia was home to 1,738 bioscience business establishments. I don't know what the criteria were for that, but this is a comparative thing. Residents held 27,000 bioscience industry jobs, and the average annual wage in bioscience sector was $31,296 higher than the private sector overall, which means it's a valuable set of jobs, and that's why lots of states want to have a biotech cluster. That's why there's competition, right? But it's important. These are high-end, highly intellectual, highly profitable, and highly contributing jobs in the environment. So, what do you do about all that? I think this is one of my favorite slides. Just send this to my kids all the time when they want to put things off. What do you do? Because I've talked to my partner Russ about some work that's been done in the past, and I'm sure you've all been involved, or many of you have been involved in thinking about how do we make Atlanta a biotechnology cluster, and or Georgia, and you can keep putting that off for a long time, and then like Yogi Berra, you may not get anywhere, or you may get somewhere, but it's not where you want to be. So, how do you stop with, for whatever set of reasons, is thinking about it and not doing something about it? Right, that's the question. Well, let's all be realistic. It's a long, difficult, complex process. And building a cluster is not going to be easy if that's what you want to do. Just like building a company. They all have life cycles and intense needs and things that have to be done. Well, but it starts with science, right? If there were no science here, then we wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be a worthwhile discussion. It starts with science. But science isn't enough, right? I started off this conversation by saying it's a team sport. So you need more than just the scientific aspects of it. And you need more than just funding. This one says, I am your idea. One day you'll come look for me and I'll be gone, right? And so it's more than science and it's more than funding. And I'll give you an example of that. Russ mentioned, I chaired the Biotechnology Council of New Jersey, and I was actually simultaneously on the executive committee of New York Bio. Because I lived in New York and I worked in New Jersey. And I had, at that time, the company I was running was called Alteon. It was my third biotech company. The first biotech company was technology out of New York University that had moved to New Jersey. The second one was technology out of Sloan Kettering that had been in New York and then moved to Connecticut. And the third one was technology out of Rockefeller University that was now in New Jersey. And I was sitting around the table with the people who were the executive committee members, and we were thinking about how do we brand New York Bio, then called NIBA? What do we do for that? So I did this to Russ last night. I literally was listening to them, and I wrote on a piece of paper an idea, and I wrote on something on the other side, another idea. I said, here's the tagline we're going to use. The cures start here. Because you had Sloan Kettering, Rockefeller, Cornell, Columbia, you had all these institutions. Right? The cures start here. And I said, but you're not going to use the second side of this paper. That side said, and then they leave. Because that's what was going on in New York. All this great science, wonderful things happening. But nobody would build a biotech company in New York City. Right? So they just actually dropped the tagline a year ago, and Alexandria Realty has put up 2 buildings right next to NYU, which are becoming something of an entrepreneurial hub. And also, as we'll talk about in a few seconds, people want to live in New York City again. Right? So the cures start here for New York, and now they're staying, some of them. Okay, that's important. That's part of the historical perspective and the issue you'll have to think about. So to build the cluster is going to require a vision of what you want to do and action to make it happen. That's the challenge. And that's because a cluster is exactly what you think. It's an ecosystem, right? It's that team of all those talents coming together to make something happen. And right now there's interesting science, but there's not really a cluster. In fact, there's a steady state that's not growing of interest. So how do you do that? Well, the data is all there about what's going on in clusters, and again, glasses. But how do emerging entrepreneurial hubs become America's new boomtowns? And the thing here is that the dominant centers remain U.S. cities that combine density, great universities, and an open-minded culture to attract the best talent. All right? No surprises there. Another article, Bay Area biotechs. And how many of you have been to San Francisco and seen what's going on in the new complex right near the ballpark? I mean, it's scary. I mean, I went to Stanford Business School, so I left a long time ago. My little house that I rented with friends is worth $3 million. You can't live out there, but everybody wants to. That's an interesting sentence, isn't it? But that's what's going on. Nobody, that's the old restaurant's too busy, nobody goes there anymore type of problem. Everybody wants to be in San Francisco or Boston, but we know what's going on. It's too expensive. They don't have enough property anymore. In Boston, they have a big problem because Google and Facebook and Amazon are moving into Cambridge, right? So they're crowding out the biotech companies, but everybody still wants to be there. There's a hint, right? Despite higher rents and labor costs, firms continue to flock to premier markets. There are dozens of articles like this, but you get the idea. So the question is, where from here? How does intent become a reality? How does that question mark go away? What's the way to do it? Well, there are a bunch of lessons. One is the team sport aspect. The key is to attract and retain entrepreneurial talent. You can't have an orchestra where all you have is the conductor. You have to have people to play the instruments. You have to have the full continuum of talent. There's a lot to be said about millennials and bringing in the young. You have to have the leaders. You also have to have the doers, the young talent, the young people who are very, very interested. My 23-year-old son says this picture does not look like a millennial in any way whatsoever. And he's right. It's probably a slide I've had for 20 years, but you get the idea. That is also culture. When after business school, I went to McKinsey in Chicago. And when I left McKinsey to go to the Lipasum company, where's John? In 1982, my friends on the East Coast said, "How could you?" And my friends on the West Coast said, "What took you so long?" And that cultural difference exists to this day. I lived in New York for a long, long time. I felt alone as an entrepreneur because I had all the bankers and the lawyers, and when I go to a party and they'd say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "Well, I run a biotech company." "Oh, that's nice. And what do you do?" Because it's the cultural aspect of it all that is really very, very critical. Lesson 2 is in the near term for a place like Atlanta, you're going to have to import some leadership. Right? You're going to have to import people who have done it before and can help you learn how to do it for the first time or do it again. Right? So the science needs to be nurtured by people who know what it's like to cross the huge, huge gaps in developing new medicines. And it's true for any industry, by the way, but just happens to be we're talking about biotech here. But anywhere you want to have a new industry, you're going to have people who understand how to build that industry. And that doesn't really exist here. But again, there are so many different questions that you have to answer along the way, so much experience that's needed as well as expertise, that in the near term, if Atlanta or if Georgia wants to become a hub, it's going to need to bring in that talent in various ways on a quote, imported basis. I had a huge problem in North Carolina. Chimerix, the last company I ran, was a very hot company. But I still couldn't get people to move to North Carolina. And part of the problem was it wasn't Chimerix, it was what happens if Chimerix goes away? What's the next company? Where do I go? And so one of the decisions I reached, which was antithetical to what I'd always believed whoever's the senior leadership of a company has to live near the company. You got to be there all the time to breathe it, to be part of the culture of the company. You can't get senior level people to do that in the near term. You're going to have people who will fly in for a couple of days and fly out until you get the pot brewing enough. It's just the way it is. You'll need those people. You're going to have to invest a lot in infrastructure as well as people. Now, what a lot is, I don't know. But I know it's not zero. There's probably a need to have, it's just what New York did find. They built a place where people could go. Russ mentioned I was a venture capitalist for a little bit. I moved from New York to Washington, D.C. area, Baltimore, Washington, to start up a seed venture firm in 1989, 90. And there was nothing there. The idea was there was technology dripping from the trees of NIH and Johns Hopkins. And it was a seed venture fund. And it was a lovely idea. It took about 15 years for that lovely idea to get anywhere near kind of reality. And nowadays, they've kind of lost their momentum. So Russell, remember, we're good friends with a guy named Tom Watkin, who ran Human Genome Sciences, which was the really hot company in the area. When GSK bought Human Genome Sciences, Tom tells me he spent the first year afterwards helping his senior management team find new jobs, and they all left the area because it wasn't sustainable. They didn't have a hub, it was too spread out, the infrastructure was complex, ... Lesson 4 is just collaboration and interaction. These meetings and things like this are hugely important. Getting people together to talk about issues, to become support groups. So when I chaired New Jersey Bio, we put together CEO forums. Just get together once a month or once a quarter and talk about the issues. CFO, CEO, business development, research. Try and find a way to get people together to talk about their issues, because there are so many different common issues, if that sentence makes sense, that people can talk about. And if they're not talking, you feel isolated, right? And that's why you get a flatline trajectory. You don't get a trajectory. It's got to be coordinated and interactive. So again, just to talk about the fact that we're here today. So Georgia Bio is doing a lot, and a lot of other institutions, to try and make this happen, I think is hugely important. Be creative. This one's one of my favorite slides. The guy saying to the cat, never ever think outside the box. But you have to think outside the box. What can you do that's different? And what are the key resources, skills, and attributes that you can bring to bear to change the trajectory? I don't personally know what those are from a distance, but I do think that you have to figure out what they are. Because a lot of people have done a lot of things, and it may not work here. Again, one of my favorite slides, what lemmings believe. We're going off into the heavens. Well, not necessarily. You really have to think through, at least Russ is laughing. You really need to think through what it is that are the special attributes. And you have to break the process into specific, tangible objectives. It's not, we want to be a cluster. It's, how do we get to be a cluster? Again, I'm satisfied if they just develop mutual respect. Take a tangible, achievable set of objectives and build on them. So it's a step function type of approach as opposed to, 2 dots. We're here, we want to be there. Nope, we're here, we have to do this. We have to come up with a strategy that makes sense. Focus on geography. That goes back to the whole concept of how did the other places become clusters? Location is critical. And so for better or for worse, Atlanta, and I don't mean that in a negative way about Atlanta, just saying, Atlanta's the natural hub. You have a city, it's a vibrant city, you have to locate near it. This is going to be the politically untenable part at times. If I've seen anything over the course of my years involved with New York, New Jersey, Baltimore, Washington, living in California, it's that when it gets into the point of people who have the money, which is the legislative process, everybody wants to have the next biotech little cluster near them. And that's a wonderful idea, except it's not the way the world works. It works the other way. You have a core and it radiates out. You can't start off with different places around and hope it becomes a cluster. It's just not the way a cluster works, right? Cluster works with somebody plants Genentech in South San Francisco and it radiates out. It requires a success, it requires things to happen, but the attributes are the core. So, if you can read the slide, another one, that something's not right here and ... Nobody's living past 30. You don't have the right attributes. You have to figure out what the right attributes are to make it work. It's also a long process. Let's all be realistic. It's 10 to 20 years. Perhaps 10 is even being optimistic. New York was about 15 years. When they started putting real money into it, things began to really happen. So it requires that will and that realization that you're on a longer-term trajectory. It's not something that happens overnight. If the objective is to get rid of the question mark in 10 to 20 years, how are you going to get rid of the question mark? It's people, it's money, it's time, and it's going to have a lot of resistance and a lot of problems along the way, because that's just the way it is. This is my slide that says Sisyphus was an optimist. It is worth the effort, however, because if you get there, you really get something very, very interesting at the end. So let me not leave this with just theory, but let's get kind of granular for a second. What are the things to do to, so one of my venture capital mentors once said, you can't cross a chasm in 2 leaps. So the question is, what do you do? First of all, people have done this before. There are ways to think about it. It's a complex process, which requires a lot of thinking, but it's one that you can do. Just got to focus on doing it. So time and money, right, are the most complex. What you lack is time, and you lack money. So how do you build time into the process, and what do you do? One is you got to start thinking about developing companies from a team perspective now. So anybody who holds up a hand and says, I have really great science, that's wonderful. What's the rest of your team look like? What are you doing for the business people? How are you thinking about money? How are you thinking about who's going to help you, not now, but a year from now, in terms of building this enterprise. Because it is a team sport, it is a collaboration, it is an interactive piece. It's what Russ and I spend our time doing a lot. I describe what I've been doing, what Salutramed's been doing as off-market. Boston, people in Boston don't particularly call us up and say, come to Boston, because they have a complete infrastructure. And we don't get calls to come to San Francisco. But we're doing a lot of work, what I call off-market, including actually internationally, where there are countries that want to have their biotech business expand, and they have really interesting science, but no management infrastructure, no scientific infrastructure that's been through the drug development process. So we spend a lot of our time doing just that because of the needs of these various markets and the fact that you may have brilliant science, but science alone is not enough. It's really the glue, if you will, is putting all the pieces together. Investors will tell you, there's a lot of venture capitalists, and John, again, there are other venture capitalists here, Howard's here, and other folks will tell you, they invest in science, but they invest in the ability of the people in the company to make that science real. So it's the overall management structure of a company or the skill sets that are being brought to bear that make it all work. Right? It's not just the science alone. Look how wonderful it is, it's going to change the world. Isn't really a good sentence if you can't get from changing the world to the reality of having done it. So again, I think that what can you afford, what can you attract? Starting off, you're going to be bringing pieces. Atlanta or Georgia is going to be bringing in other parts of this team puzzle from other parts of the country. And it may be fly-in stuff, but it's part of the strategy, right? Thinking outside the box. How do you make that happen? It's going to have to be in the early days. You're going to have to grow. You're going to have to borrow it before you can actually have it here. It's just the way it works. And I think that's really important. I think that's going to help build the value proposition. Temporary folks to help people who will, in various skills, be it regulatory, experienced IP attorneys. I don't know I'm sure there are some attorneys in the audience, there always are, but people who've really gone through the wars of not only writing patent applications, but litigating them. Because there are so many things that go wrong in patents these days. How do you make sure you protect that appropriately? If you think about all the different aspects of a company, who are you going to find the smartest people? And even if they're a little cheaper locally, they also, may not have the experience base for your particular piece of science. Right? That's the problem, and that's the issue, and that's the challenge. And then, things are going to go wrong all along the way. You're just going to have to live through it and power through them, because it's never a straight line. One of my friends once said, you cannot model the complexities and outcome of a clinical trial, because everything will go wrong along the way. And drug development's like that. Things go wrong daily. Your goal is to have enough experienced people around you to power through that problem, to figure out, okay, how do we get around this issue? What do we do next? And then, if it all works, the world is your oyster. I just made it very easy on this final slide, but there's a lot to be done, a lot that can be done. There are a lot of skills and tools here. You have a fabulous city. It's just a matter of the intent and will to get rid of the question mark. I thank you all.